Peace, this is Doug. This is my Zoom Sampletrak. This is my Electron Digitakt. And what I've got connecting them is my Retrokits RK-002, which is a programmable MIDI cable. And it's going to be the real star of the show today. I think the Sampletrak is a great piece of gear. I like the sound of it. I like the pad system, but I don't like the sequencer. So more often than not, when I use my Sampletrak, I use it as a MIDI module and sequence it with my Electron Digitakt. But one of the things that's always kind of annoyed me about the Sampletrak as a MIDI module is that it doesn't respond to MIDI velocity. And if you're using the pads on the machine, they're not velocity sensitive either. So if you want to have some variation in, say, the level of your kick drum, then you need to use more than one pad and set different levels for each pad. I never liked that. But here's the thing, if you look at the Sampletrak's MIDI implementation, there is a way to edit pad levels from an external controller, but to do it, you need to be able to send polyphonic pressure messages, or poly aftertouch. The problem is, the Digitakt only sends channel aftertouch, and that's where the RK-002 comes in. The RK-002 was made by a company called Retrokits. It's what they call a smart MIDI cable. It has a microprocessor on the orange end that can do all sorts of things. What I programmed mine to do is to take MIDI velocity messages and convert them to polyphonic pressure messages that the Sampletrak can actually use. But I didn't stop there. I added a level control so that I can scale velocity. I've added control for pad panning. I've added toggles to turn the effects enable and pad reverse on and off. And I've also added a few note modes. Normally, when you're controlling the Sampletrak via MIDI, you can only play samples as gated, no matter how you've set them up on the pads. To get around this, I've added a one-shot mode. You can toggle this on and off with MIDI CC22. All this does is filter out note off messages so that samples can play all the way through. 0 is one-shot mode. Anything else, so 1 or above, is gated. I've also added a choke mode, and you get to this with MIDI CC23. If you turn this on, then you'll only be able to play one note at a time, and this works whether you're in gated or one-shot mode. The way this is set up, the Sampletrak will listen to notes played from channels 1 through 8. And these controls are per channel. So each channel can have its own level setting, panning, note mode, etc. But what that also means is that if you've turned on choke mode for channel 1 like I have, then you're only affecting notes sent from that channel. Channels won't choke each other. Let's see this in action. I've loaded a new project, I've set up my pattern on my Digitakt, and on channel 1 I've got a kick drum. What I want to do now is change up the settings. So first thing I want to do is set CC22 to 0. That'll put this in one-shot mode. And I also want to add some variation in velocity. I can also use CC29 to turn the volume up and down while still keeping the variation in velocity. Now remember, I said that these settings are per channel, so if I go over to channel 2, my snare is still gated. My kick drum is in one shot, but my snare is gated. So I'm just going to change this to one shot. Let's do something a little different with the hi-hats. I've already got them set to one shot. I've already put a little variation in their velocity. What I want to do instead is send an LFO to the pad panning. So I'm going to set the destination to CC30. I don't know if you heard it, but the hi-hat track is actually cycling between 3 different samples. But because they're being triggered from this channel, their pads are edited by this channel settings. The same thing is true for reverse and for effects enable. Reverse is on CC25 and effects enable is on CC26. I've also got this piano thing that I made on my Digitakt, and for this one what I want to do is send an LFO to the pad level, and what that's going to do is act as kind of an envelope for a faux sidechain effect. So let's hear how it sounds without it first of all. Now I'm going to set the destination to the pad level. And I'm going to get rid of it for this step. What's pretty cool about this is that this isn't an effect. This is just how the pad is being triggered. So I can still run this through the effects on the sample track. So let's do that. But instead of reverb, I'm going to switch this over to a low pass, which is on program 7. I'm also going to effects enable this track, and I'm going to control them with CCs 27 and 28. By the way, I've added CCs 27 and 28 because for whatever reason Zoom decided to have their CCs range from 0 to 99 instead of 0 to 127 like everything else. So CCs 27 and 28 just scale what's sent so that you can twist the knob without having to remember that. If you want, you can still use CCs 12 and 13. Those are the ones in the manual. Also, changing the effect with a program change is something you can do with a regular old MIDI cable. That's not some special power that this cable gives you. So stepping back, the way this is set up, channels 1 through 8 all work the same way. By default, pad level is set to 100, notes are set to play gated, and the choke function is off. Also, unless you actually change the pad panning, effects enable, or reverse settings, the RK-002 won't send a message to change them. That will only happen when you start moving the knob around. So whatever's on the pads will just be what's on the pads until you change that. Channel 8 is a little bit different because you can also control the panning and effects enable of the source pad. There are also a few things to keep in mind about some of the mechanics of this. One thing to know is that reverse and effects enable need to be turned on before a pad is played. However, pad panning and pad level can be controlled in real time, which is why I was able to make that envelope. But it's important to know that any real-time changes to pad level and pad panning on each channel will only affect the parameters of one pad at a time. So you can get some weird things happening if you try to use real-time controls on notes played together from one channel. Check this out. I've got a synth sound that I spread across all my pads. It sounds like this. I've also got an LFO set to pad level. It sounds like this. But when I play 4 notes together, I'll just hear the LFO on the last note that I played. And if I try to play them all together, then the slow attack will just leave all but one of the notes silent. But, you know, works normally if I play them like that. However, if I turn this modulation off, I'll be able to play them all at once with no problem. It's also important to know that this cord will not store the values that you set after you turn off your MIDI controller or unplug the cable. Storing values is definitely possible, but it would mean less channels. And even if you could store them, you'd only be able to save one state at a time. I just didn't think it was worth it. Okay, we have one more channel to talk about, and that's channel 9. If you do like using your Sampletrak sequencer, this is going to make it a lot easier and more flexible. And there's no complicated setup. Channel 9 can't trigger the pads. Instead, you can use channel 9 to trigger songs. That means that you can use an external sequencer to chain patterns together. This is one of the things that's always kind of annoyed me about the Sampletrak. You've got this playlist feature where you can, trigger songs like pads. So it feels like you should be able to trigger the songs the same way you can trigger the pads over MIDI, but you can't. You need to use song select messages. Digitakt doesn't send song select messages, but this just converts MIDI notes to song select messages that the Sampletrak can understand. Okay, so let's say you want to use this little program I made. If you've already got a Retrokits RK-002, then you can find it over at the DUY exchange. That's D, U, and Y like yellow, not driving under the influence. If you don't have one, then you can follow the link in the description to buy one from Retrokits. I don't get anything out of that, but this is a product that I've got a whole lot of use out of, and I'm more than happy to endorse. The folks over at Retrokits also provide some great customer service. In fact, they very patiently helped me through some issues with this that turned out to be user error. But hang on, before you can get my firmware on your new cable, you'll also need a MIDI interface with 5-pin MIDI ports so that you can program it. I'm using an old M-Box. I think most interfaces will work just fine. You just need MIDI in and out female ports. So this, not this, this, not this. So yeah, please let me know what you think. If you find yourself using this, let me know. I'd love to see this in action. In the meantime, please like and subscribe. Check me out on Instagram and consider buying my music over at Bandcamp. Peace.